new podcast for everyone who is putting the pieces together to make life work, featuring co-hosts Christine Michel Carter, along with Bright Horizons Priya Krishnan. Candid conversations, stories, and strategies from corporate leaders, public figures, and everyday people like you and me. We're all in this together. The Work-Life Equation from Bright Horizons, every other Wednesday starting March 8th, everywhere you listen to podcasts. Real stories, real talk, real life.
Priya!
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
You cannot make this up. So I kid you not, the clock hit 1 o'clock and I got an email from my son's school saying that he was sick. And I was like, oh my God.
Typical.
Par for the course, right? Par for the course.
It is. And it feels like it's that time of the year when, you can't seem to predict anything with kids and with your own health.
Oh my gosh, with the weather being warm, then cold, exactly. So, I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. So I knew exactly what was going on. It's allergies, and I'll have to deal with that when we're done, right? Because we have something very exciting to talk about.
So exciting. And please thank him for me. I hope he feels better.
I'm like, he'll be fine. He'll be fine. Happy Women's History Month.
And to you. It was a day, then it was a week, and now it's a month. So
I know.
Hey,
soon it will be, last year was a year. According to the dictionary, it was a year for us. So soon it'll be a century, hopefully. This year's theme I heard from the National Women's History Alliance is that it is celebrating women who tell our stories, which I thought was so fitting for us to talk about as we're announcing the podcast today. When you hear the story of a woman from another woman, how does that make you feel?
I think, the fact that you're not alone is the first thing I take away from it. The joys and the travails seem the same, immaterial of geography, immaterial of age. My mom told me that problems with children don't go away, they just change. And now I'm realizing they grow. But it is that whole, the fact that it's a shared experience has probably been one of my biggest takeaway from these conversations.
100%. I think about the two of us and how we're hosting this podcast, and we have different backgrounds. We have different perspectives of raising children. You're raising two boys. I'm raising a boy and a girl. They're both from multicultural backgrounds, but it's like we're raising them with different experiences. Yet, and these celebrity moms that we're talking to, these activists, yet we all share the same struggles and challenges and are trying to navigate this all together. And I feel like with the podcast, for years, I've interviewed everybody from Beyonce's mama, Tina Lawson, thank you, Lord, to the vice president of the US. Obviously, Beyonce's mama is more important, but I've had the opportunity to listen to these women's stories and their challenges and their passion about motherhood. And I've had to write about it, but now to actually talk to them and hear those conversations, for others to hear how those conversations go on the podcast, it's so exciting. I'm so excited.
Me too. I'm just thrilled. And, like I said, each one of these conversations, I realized your journey is so different from mine in some ways, but similar. I'm a forced single mom. You're a single mom. We both care to bits, in spite of the fact that you're ignoring him at 1 o'clock right now, immensely about our children, but we love what we do, and we're better moms for the fact that we work, and there's pride in both fronts. Like, we're great moms and we try our best there, and we love our work and we try our best here. So and I think that's the more we have in common, I think approaches become similar, but there's also it's great to see that diversity of both thought and approaches, and you can learn every single day, and I do from you.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I think that people don't realize what Bright Horizons brings to this conversation of parenting and caregiving. And what's interesting is that I'm preparing my next piece for Forbes, and it's actually about how the labor force participation rate has not it hasn't exceeded the number that it was back in February 2020. And a lot of people are saying that single mothers are the ones who are most disproportionately affected by that, the female labor force participation rate, and that one of the reasons is directly related to childcare. Because there's studies that show if a woman has access to formal childcare instead of their network, their friends, their family, somebody, a homeless man on the street, which so many of us are forced to just like scramble and figure out who could do childcare, they're able to stay in the labor force. So you guys definitely have a right to be having this conversation and be talking about what it means to be a working parent in caregiving.
Yeah, and I think it's like a, it's so much of an economic case. This is not about, and you remember all the statistics. February of 2020, there were more educated women entering the workforce. Women were having children later in life. And to that extent, and it was probably the first year where it was an all-time high in terms of women workforce participation. And if something like a pandemic forced over 3 million women to leave the workforce, the half glass full person in me says that it brought the conversation to the fore. And I agree, our sense of purpose and being is about saying how you have to be anchored at home to be successful in life. And hence our, the topic of our podcast, which is the work-life equation, and constantly sort of balancing it makes an immense amount of sense.
I love how your glass half full, because I'm the one thinking of all of the balls that I'm trying to juggle in the air, and then all of a sudden this tiny little bird lands on my nose, and then it's like, well, it just fell to pieces. Just absolutely fell to pieces. We have some really phenomenal guests. Like, if you're watching this, we have some phenomenal guests. I can't even believe the guests that we have and that we were able to secure. But who was your favorite, Priya?
So I think I can't pick a favorite because they were such amazing conversations. What I can tell you is that each one made me both see life and how I was thinking about work in a different perspective. So as an example, when we spoke with Deborah, and the fact that she's done so many things, right? It's been something that she's shifted from one thing to the other, and she has this immense gratitude and attitude. And she was so sassy and so incredibly hot for a mother of 3 children, that was like an inspiration for me, saying you can actually pick up a completely different area, and you're balancing home and life. With Indra, it was different. I think I fell in love with my husband a little bit more through that conversation, because I had this sense of how much support I got from him, and how that helped me become successful as I contribute to his life. It's been an equal partnership. And with Alana, I think just fighting for the cause and staying quiet and under the radar, but sort of staying the course and consistent and doing your own thing, and how fiercely protective she was about her daughter's future, and how she saw the world from what the world she wanted to hand over to her was so inspiring. So I think I took different things. So so there isn't a favorite. And I'm hoping through these conversations there are many, many more lessons that we learn. But what were yours? What did you like?
It's funny that you bring up those women, because for me, Indra Nui and Deborah Cox definitely stuck out. And it wasn't just because I showed Deborah that I can't sing, because I can't, we know that. But I feel like we learned stuff about them that you can't just Google or read in a book. I mean, both women shared firsthand how they were raised. There were a lot of things that they talked about that they've never talked about before, their insecurities, and then how that manifests itself, not only in their work, but also their parenting style. So I feel like working parenthood is the side of them that you just can't find answers to online, which I think made for a richer conversation. And they were able to discuss things like everything that working parents and caregivers face. Like, how do you accelerate in your career when you're not a networker, when you're not the one on the golf course or going to the happy hours? How do you advocate for yourself? I think every caregiver, whether they're a pro at this like us, or having newborns in the house, could appreciate the conversations.
That is so true. And we learned so much about them. I mean, Indra has such a successful book. You read it, but there were things that, through the conversation that we learned about, which were very formative for her. And you're right. And that was immense. And they were human also, right? I mean, each one of them was, yeah. they're so successful. And I think part of it is how these extraordinary women have ordinary problems like you and I, and then how ordinary women go on to do extraordinary things, right? Like, I
Yeah.
think single moms are superheroes. The fact that they end up carrying the load and having to do both. But it looks like, you don't think of them as overachievers, but I think what they have to do is a very, very different dynamic to a two-parent household, right? So I think that's been the great thing about these conversations, is you realize there's a normalization, and then there is this new thing that you discover that people do, which inspires you.
I mean, at the same time, as a single mother who was once a married mother, I think that there's a dynamic with being married and trying to pursue your dreams, with always keeping in the back of your mind that you're a part of a partnership, and how that impacts your partnership, and what the trajectory of your partnership looks like when you're trying to pursue your dreams. So I have an appreciation, yes, for single mothers, but I remember how hard it was to be a married mother as well. And it is not easy, both sides. No one has it easy at all.
Yeah, that's true. That
Yeah.
is true.
Yeah. So I think we have some folks who have given us questions. So let's take some questions from those who are with us right now. How did you come up with the idea for the podcast? I am simply the co-host. Priya, do you want to share where you came up with the idea for the podcast?
I think stories need to be told, and podcasts have become so, through the pandemic, all of us listen to podcasts. It feels non-intrusive. It feels like you can go on your run, go for your walk, and you can listen and come away inspired. And somebody told me I have a voice for a podcast. It was literally those two things. And you're this bundle of energy, and I've just enjoyed doing this because I have this calm demeanor, and you're just, all energy. And so I think we're a great team as well. So hopefully everyone's going to enjoy it.
I couldn't agree more. I think my children would disagree with you come 8 o'clock at night, because I am a morning person. I'm definitely not a bundle of energy at night. I am, get me in the bed, put on my Dwight Schrute and Michael Scott, and I want to watch The Office, and don't bother me until it's time for me to start the whole circus all over again the next morning. Let's see. How did your own parenting experiences affect your perspectives on the podcast? My goodness. Well, I can take this one. I can start this one. My own parenting experiences, for the women who had been able to get past the broken rung, which is the point at which a woman changes from being a senior manager or a manager to a director. That's really when we start to fall off on the corporate ladder. I've thought about all of the challenges I faced in getting over that broken rung, and how it took a village. It took formal childcare. I did it through a pandemic. I did it as a single mom. It was so extremely hard, and yet and still, I thought I was a complete failure. The imposter syndrome still kicks in every now and again. And I really wanted to hear from those women, how did they go through that? I wanted to hear the moments that they felt like they were having imposter syndrome, or they were burning out, and how they managed to push through and overcome that, and hear and let other women hear their stories too. Because like you said at the start of this, I feel like there's beauty in telling our stories as women and seeing that we're not alone.
Well, and again, this is why I think we're such a good team, because um, my own perspective has been, I actually became a better manager when I became a mom. And I felt I learned a lot about working with people and working with teams after I became a mother. And I think, as women, we have that advantage. I'm not saying that, my husband doesn't have the advantage, but there was something about, knowing that my son mimicked me when I walked up and down the hallway, that he looked back when he was, on the swing, to know that I had his back. All of that became formative in how I thought about work. But what I also realized is that because I had a mom who didn't work, and she chose not to work after a certain point in mine and my sister's life, and I had a mom-in-law who worked, I saw two perspectives, but it was still very different from my own, as I was, traversing geographies and traversing jobs. And so I really just wanted to hear other women and how they dealt with this. And like I said, it was just heartwarming to both hear the commonalities, but also the differences. I think the respect for the differences was immense. And so it helps you become a better person. Both parenting, I think the podcast is going to make me a better person just listening to, differences of how people approach things. So this has been an immense experience from a growth standpoint for me.
I love that. You know what's interesting that I don't think I knew was that you had those two perspectives, because I do as well. I grew up with my grandmother who spent one day working in a Macy's and told my grandfather, "This is for the birds. I'm not going to do this anymore." And that was the only day she had worked in her life. And then my mother, who is very successful, and like I think of the 80s power suits, and she would never wear sneakers with her power suit, but like the full makeup and the fluffy, like that was my mother. She was working woman. And it was interesting to see how those two perspectives, and it is interesting now to see how that molds me as a mother and a working woman.
Yeah, and the fact is, what I loved about them was the fact that it was their own choices. My mom-in-law worked because it was her choice, and my mom stayed at home after a point because it was her choice. I feel so many people aren't afforded
Yes.
that, and hence, part of what I do every day, get out of bed and try and see how we can make this easier for families at Bright Horizons. You do it through your work and your voice and the active conversation that you try to have. I think that is a big part of what drives me, is that people should do it because it's a choice, not because it's forced upon them.
Absolutely. What makes this podcast special, and how does it differ from others that you have listened to?
I think the fact that we learned these little nuances about people and they shared openly and honestly is what's special about the podcast. You will hear things about Indra that you would not see on a book, or in her book, or on a blog, or in one of her speeches. She was just a regular mom having a conversation and banter with two other moms, and that, I think, is special about the podcast. You should talk about why you think it's different from others that you've listened to.
So I think it's different from others because we try to start off every conversation with our "here we go" moment, which is where we talk about something that has challenged us as working parents, and a difficult conversation that we needed to have with our child that made us say, "Oh, here we go. How are we going to have this conversation?" Which other people may refer to as dinner table conversations, but nobody really eats around a dinner table anymore. So I think the podcast differs, and it's special because we recognize what real parents are dealing with today. But then it differs from others because not only do we have that moment, but we force our guests to also answer that question, and they listen to our answers. So then you are hearing realistically in real time what another parent, a very successful celebrity parent or an everyday parent, is doing, just like us.
Yeah, you're right. That is actually one of my favorite parts. It's like, what is she going to talk about today? And I have 10 things that I could say I had as here you go moments when, it's tough to pick one, but that actually helps us ease into the conversation. You're right. And,
Yeah.
it's great that our guests have always participated and spoken about their day-to-day stuff.
And there's never a dull moment. I mean, even with this live, literally 1 o'clock, and there's my email about the sickness. Like, we always have something to talk about. What does work-life balance mean to you? Oh my God, I would love to start this one, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
So I have been quoted as saying that no parent can have it all. And the only way you can have it all is to go to the grocery store and buy a bottle of all detergent. And even during the pandemic, that, was sold out. I say, because I'm working on my cursing. But that's the thing, is that you cannot have it all. It ebbs and flows. And it's not so much balance, so much as there are times when you're going to give 100% to something and times when you can't give anything to something simultaneously. So for me, my children know there are times when I have to travel for work, when I am not going to be able to be at certain events, when I'm not going to be able to do pick up and drop off. And that's when I have to rely on my network. And then there are other times where I'm like, guess what? It's a do not disturb, because My daughter is going through her first heartbreak as a lesbian and a preteen, and I can't answer this email after 5. I have to show her what it means to get over a breakup. So it always ebbs and flows for me.
Yeah, and I don't think work and life actually get balanced. I think they're so integrated these days. What you do at work influences what happens at home. What happens at home influences what. So this notion of sort of, you live at work or you work from home, I feel like is so blurred. And I think that got exasperated through the pandemic. But the question of, can you actually achieve it? Uh, I don't think the intent is to achieve perfection, and especially as women, this was the lesson that learned the hard way: is you will always compromise, and I think learning to live with that compromise in some shape and form is helpful. When you need to be at that PTM, just like you need to do that 5 o'clock conversation with your daughter. I think saying the rest of it can wait and has to wait is really, really critical. And unless you're able to do that, it'll always feel like it's at conflict with each other. But, I don't know whether you remember the part of the conversation with Indra when we were doing it, Christine. She spoke about how can work be designed around life. And, if nothing else, I'm hoping employers post the pandemic realize, and she asked a very simple question, right? Why is work till 5 o'clock when school ends at 3 o'clock? Like,
Yes.
why can, work not end at 3, and why don't people have that flexibility? Again, the glass half full person in me says that now that we've been able to see that through the pandemic, we've seen hybrid work, we've seen adoption of remote work. Perhaps, it'll force employers and employees to think about how they actually manage work around life.
And it's not that working parents aren't productive and that they don't want to work, right? Because I've seen studies show, and I know from my firsthand experience, work is very much something that drives me. It defines me, but it doesn't define me as much as motherhood. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't matter to me. It's the number 2 thing behind motherhood because it makes me who I am. So just because there are certain things that I need to do to make it work and integrate in my life doesn't mean it's not important.
Yeah, and I think I'm actually a saner mother because I work. So
Yes.
in my case, if I didn't work, I would have to put all this energy into the boys, which would have been great for them. So yeah, it is this notion of saying, it is important to me, and all statistics. This is not the feminist in me who's saying it. Women are incredibly conscientious workers. So to that extent, this notion of, I will make it happen. I just have to do it on my own terms. If employers can come to that, I think, we will have significantly higher women workforce participation.
It's Women's History Month. It's the feminist in me. Women are amazing. What significant moment or episode from the show stands out to you? I think that we covered that. I think it's safe to say that we covered that.
I think so too.
Yeah. What's the next one? Let's see. What moments from the podcast did you find to be sentimental? Well, when Indra said that she would adopt me and that I wouldn't have to pay for her master class. I found that to
I
be
don't
very
think you gave her an
no,
option. You do
seriously.
realize that, right?
Right. No, seriously, when she,
You didn't give.
said that she recognizes the challenges of single working mothers, that was incredible. I found that just a very emotional moment for me.
And I thought, a heartwarming. That was when Deborah turned around the conversation and said, "Hey, why are we talking about me? We should talk about you. You're the one who's moved from one continent to the other." That, the fact there was this breezy conversation, and uh, there was an equal amount of respect met it both ways, was truly heartwarming from each one of those conversations.
Love it. Who would be your dream guest for another season of the work life equation? I really feel like I don't even need to answer this question because I literally wrote a book and thanked this woman in my acknowledgments. But Beyonce, like, she is life. I am such a member of the Beehive. I have written a full article about how she has inspired me as a working mother. I can't imagine a better guest. I would maybe she would be the worst guest because I would just sit there and be like this the whole time and like wouldn't talk. So I don't know if I would get anything out of her, but she would be my dream guest. What about you?
So I think, right, perhaps Sarah Blakely, I found her fascinating in terms of the fact that she, both brought shapewear into fashion, but she also demystified this whole notion of shape and size and all of this. You have a daughter, right? And I'm just
Yes.
saying this as I was growing up, it was so difficult. You had all these notions around size zero and how you had to present and how you looked. The fact that, I was incredibly good at math and I was top of class seemed almost not consequential in comparison to how I presented myself, or the skin of my color, etc.,
Right.
the color of my skin, etc. So for me, the fact that she took those away, and there was this whole notion of body proud, and so I hope someone out there is listening and that she comes on to, both of them come on to our next episodes for the next season of Work Life.
From your mouth to God's ear. And what do you hope to accomplish with the launch of this podcast?
So I have been the biggest champion of women workforce participation. I felt very strongly about this when we moved back from the UK to India. I wanted to make sure all these wonderful women who were part of my teams didn't have to quit because they had children and their parents couldn't travel, or they didn't have support structures that could help them. And like I said, it's an economic case. For me, the conversation around it and the conversation around how various leaders and people from different fields both struggle with it and cope with it is one. My hope is that moms take away the fact that it is something that other people cope with and they feel good about themselves and can go back to balancing it all, whatever that means for them. But more importantly, I feel like employers and the government, those are the three stakeholders in childcare, pay attention and say, if this is an economic case and this is this wonderful workforce we could tap into, how do we actually enable that to happen? And how do we prevent workforce fall off at that stage?
And I think you said that perfectly. It is a trifecta of folks who need to be able to be a part of this conversation to change what it means to be a caregiver here in the country. And I hope for the same, really. I get so many messages from women just saying they don't know that they didn't know that they had to drop out of the workforce. They didn't know that they could become an entrepreneur. They didn't know, they didn't know, they didn't know. And so many employers who say, well, the employee's mental health and financial health, et cetera, it doesn't matter to me. It's not important. It's not something that I should take into consideration. So I hope everybody gets a different lens into the other perspective. I really do. So with that, please join us at the Work-Life Equation, wherever you get your podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and share on March 8th. And happy Women's History Month. We'll let you guys get back to work. Thank you.
Thank you. We really enjoyed talking to you guys. Appreciate it.
The new podcast for everyone who is putting the pieces together to make life work, featuring co-hosts Christine Michel Carter, along with Bright Horizons Priya Krishnan. Candid conversations, stories, and strategies from corporate leaders, public figures, and everyday people like you and me. We're all in this together. The Work-Life Equation from Bright Horizons, every other Wednesday starting March 8th, everywhere you listen to podcasts. Real stories, real talk, real life.